On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
So what do we have in this episode, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, we've got a very exciting show for you this week. First of all, we go to Northern Ireland to meet our old friend Ronan Coghlan, who has more to say about the people who believe that cryptozoology is a pseudoscience. And then we go to Sumatra for another interview with an Pendek eyewitness done by Richard, Carl and Geordie on the recent Pendek expedition there. Enjoy.
I really like the old credits.
I don't like that Harry Price. He puts the kibosh on the spirits. Anyway, yeah, Barry, you know what? I was out the other day taking my constitutional and I met a terrorist and he was under a sun lamp. Under a sun lamp? Aye, he was under a sun lamp. And why was that? He was a Basque separatist.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and this young fellow here is Archibald Archimedes the Archimandrite Downs, otherwise known as Archie the Jack Russell, who, in his opinion at least, is the most important person in the Centre for Fortean Zoology. Each week we bring you a miscellany, a potpourri, if you will, of hard science, weird shit and surreality. And if you don't know what surreality is, cop a load of this. I would have thought a fairly good hint that this is what surreality means is the fact that this show, which is a serious show about cryptozoology, natural history and various other allied disciplines, is presented by an elderly fat hippie in a wheelchair and a make-believe chicken. Talking of being in a wheelchair, when I have the camera set on me like this, I think I look reasonably respectable. But if you actually see me the way that others see me, as I think it was Robert Burns once said, you can see that I am not as well and hale and hearty as I would like to have you believe. Apart from when I am hobbling from point A to point B, I am not able to put any weight on my right foot, and we are fighting very hard to make sure that the infection, which is at the moment appearing to be on the run, does not get set into my bones, because if it does I lose the foot, and that's something that I really would rather avoid at all costs. But enough of my health issues. I'd like to talk about something of far more interest to the people who watch this show. Have a look at this. This is a piece of footage which was sent me a few weeks ago by the lovely Miss Maxine, who really is my eyes and ears on various parts of the internet where I would never otherwise go. Does anybody know what this is? It's either a cetacean of some description or a shark of some description, but I want to know where it comes from and what exactly it is. Here is a screen grab I've just taken, and it really doesn't show what I want it to. But this part of the film may be gill slits, which would mean that this is a fish rather than the cetacean. But on the other hand, the rostrum at the front does appear to be that of a dolphin of some description. So I have no idea what it is. Over to you guys. Now also from this magazine comes this. I'd never heard of a talking starling before, certainly not one as good as this.
I'm gonna give him a kiss. I'm gonna give him a kiss.
By the way, both of these pieces of video are used via the doctrine of fair use. But they're not the strangest thing I've seen in the last week. That accolade goes to this picture. I mean, who would ever think that there would be a photograph, which appears not to be faked, of a dog having a cuddle with a pelican? See, wonders never do cease. Now, Ronan, you were saying the other day that you wanted to talk about one of the other reasons that those who don't understand cryptozoology label it a pseudoscience.
Yes, well, the thing about that is, for most people, the man in the street, not that he's not a bit mythical himself, but for the man in the street, he does not really believe in anything that he doesn't see in the street, that he treads so carefully. The thing is, we all have limitations to what we can believe. But time after time, life has shown that our horizons beyond which we say things could not exist are all too false. Take, for example, the case of Arthur C. Clarke. You remember him, a little man with specs.
Yeah.
Now, Arthur C. Clarke, he was a boy, was told by his mother that down the road in a field there were sheep with 4 horns apiece. Clarke did not believe his mother. He said things like that only occurred in fantasy stories. But then when he walked down the road and looked into the field, he saw before his eyes the unbelievable sheep. Now, the thing about that is that his view of the world was limited, and beyond those limits were the 4-horned sheep. Now, most of us are in the same category. We have borders beyond which there are real things, but we cannot imagine their existence, and we dismiss them without having looked into the matter at all. I remember when I was young and teaching, the matron at one of the schools where I worked was talking about various things, and somebody raised the question of ghosts. Now, I've never been very much into ghosts, but she immediately said, oh, things like that don't exist. They were beyond the limits of her horizon. Now, if she had looked into the question of the existence of ghosts, if she had studied the matter and come to that conclusion, that would have been fine. But she obviously had no interest in the topic. She just dismissed it. Now, there are people out there who, if there is something beyond the gamut of their experiences, they cannot really credit that it exists. I remember my son saying once, I don't believe Australia exists. It's just too fantastic. He wasn't being serious, obviously. But if there is something so far beyond your experience, most people can't believe it. In cryptozoology, we are speaking of extraordinary animals, extraordinary in that they have kept out of the sight of humans. Some may exist, some may not. But the question of investigation being a pseudoscience is really a contradiction in terms. Just because something seems incredible doesn't make it incredible. We have to adjust our perspective when looking into such a thing. And I feel that some scientists feel that anything that they regard as the stuff of fantasy cannot actually be true. Take, for example, the platypus. We now know that the platypus exists. But when it was first shown to a scientist, a dead platypus, he could not believe it existed. It contradicted all the laws of zoology as they were understood at the time. So he began to pull it apart to see where all the wiring joining it was. He thought it was what they call a Jenny Hanover, a fake animal made from the fur of others. He found out only too late that he had destroyed a valuable specimen. The truth of the matter is, if we say something is impossible, well, we're really taking quite a risk. What we're really saying when we say that is that something is beyond our range of experience. Take the question of inhabitants of other planets. Now, most scientists today would not dismiss completely the possibility of inhabitants being on other planets. But because they associate it with science fiction and things like that, they tend to be rather chary of admitting its existence. Now that they've discovered that there are so many exoplanets beyond our solar system, they're beginning to give the thing more thought. But the truth of the matter is, in days agone, they said, those are the things of fantasy and fairy tale. Exciting things you see in the cinema, but you don't believe there's a word of truth in them. The same is true of cryptids. Now, most people, when they think of cryptozoology, think only of the larger cryptids, Bigfoot and lacustrine monsters and things of that nature, the sea serpent, for example. But at another level, there are many cryptids that are quite small, quite diminutive, even microscopic. Now, if you were living in the 15th century and somebody told you that the earth was covered with millions of tiny animalcules that you couldn't see, you'd have been laughed out of the room. People would say that your wits had deserted you. But of course, now we know that bacteria exist in large quantities. It was just beyond the horizons of belief in those days of yore. Go back further. Supposing you see two cavemen tramping along back in the days when there were cavemen. They didn't always live in caves. And two of them had a conversation. Do you suppose, said one of them, that the earth could be not flat, but round? What do you mean, said the other? You can see perfectly well that the earth is a flat ground with little lumps in it, and bigger lumps sometimes. They're the mountains. But of course it's not round. We'd all fall off. The thing is, a spherical earth was beyond their possibilities of imagination. We all have these limits. Sometimes we make the limits too tight. There are many people who don't believe in things beyond their immediate surroundings. They don't even believe in some of the things you can ascertain from books quite easily. They don't believe that people have been to the moon, not because they have investigated the subject and come to the conclusion that the moon landings were filmed on the plains of Tibet or somewhere, but simply because they cannot stretch their minds to extraterrestrial visitations. It's the same the world over. We're all limited in what we believe is possible. But scientists are limited that way too. Secondly, of course, scientists are constrained by the fact that if they start dealing with things that are seen as a little beyond consensual reality, they may find promotion becomes a difficult thing. Tenure at universities becomes a difficult thing. Do you remember the case of John Mack, the UFO man? He was a professor at Harvard, and when he wrote a book on UFOs, there was a movement in place to get him to lose his job. He was lowering the dignity of Harvard by investigating such things. Happily, Harvard did not sack him, but there were people at Harvard who felt he was letting the university down by discussing and giving academic attention to rubbish. These limitations, the limitations of what we believe to be possible, are things we should be very careful of assuming. It's very difficult to prove something is not true or does not exist. I only know of one way to prove something does not exist. If you have a proposition, if A exists, B cannot exist. A exists, therefore B doesn't exist. But that is only expressing it as a syllogism. However, it can be applied to actual facts, but it is very hard to find the actual facts that so straightforward an argument applies to. Keep your horizons broad, and do not scoff at those whose horizons are broader than yours. That is my little piece of wisdom for today.
This next interview didn't go according to plan because they were sitting here on this very picturesque log, but the sound of the river behind them was so loud it drowned out everything on the microphones. So they reconvened here in this slightly less attractive shed, hut. What is it, Rick?
It was a cafe.
Okay, now we are in Sako. We got the what we this is climbed this in Pendek before, and this man also take me to the forest here. And then a couple of weeks ago, I climbed the Pendek by myself because I saw some creature in the forest when I go with him to the forest in this village. So maybe he can explain better than me what he saw before. Yeah.
So, what is his name?
Eggy.
So, can you ask Eggy to describe the creature he saw and what happened when he saw it?
Jadi tahun lalu saya pernah ketemu, nggak jelas, cuma tingkat aja. Itu namanya kembar.
So the last year, you saw the creature not clearly because of the raining.
Rain, yeah. And how big was it and what colour was it?
Kadang-kadangnya warna.
Sekarang 80 cm. Kadang warna itu agak merah. 80 centimeters up to 1 meter, 2 centimeters. Then the color is red and brown, like collaboration, right?
Yeah, reddy brown. Yeah. Did you see the face?
Ada jadi wajah?
Tidak.
No, he can see the face.
So it was facing away from him, looking away.
Yeah, from the
And how close was it to him?
jarak
6 atau 7.
6 up to 7 meters.
And is he sure this was not a salmon or a sunbear?
Apakah itu siapa atau
Enggak. Itu jenis itu enggak jelas.
this different type with the shaman and the sun.
And was it on two legs?
Iya.
On two legs. Did it make any noise?
Ada suara.
Enggak.
And how far away from this place?
Only 1 kilo.
Only 1 kilometre from here, yeah. what does he think the orang pendek is?
Apa menurut kita orang pendek?
Lebih ke cerita dari nenek moyang turun temurun. Yang jelas itu bukan.
Okay. Clearly make sure that's not anymore. Because if you hear from the ancestor before, there's a folklore story about the creature in this village.
So he thinks it's a spirit just because he's been told it's a spirit from folklore.
Yeah. You know, before he also sent me some track of Ronan Pendek before.
Yeah. So the tracks?
Yeah, I saw the tracks as well.
Yeah.
He sent to me.
So he's found tracks. So why does he think it's a spirit? If it leaves tracks like an animal?
Kalau kecil ini kan itu semacam spirit. Tapi mana tak ada tapak maknya.
Masih membinggung.
Yeah, he's like confused.
Because he's just confused.
Yes, he's confused.
Yeah. Well, if it's leaving tracks, it's not a spirit.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Can he? Is it possible he could describe its feet? Describe its feet, not from the tracks. Did he see its feet in the observation? I know he said he didn't see its legs, but.
Oh ya. Jadi jejak itu ukurannya itu kurang lebih segini lah, 20 cm. Nah, dan jejak itu di pas agak jarak. Ini kan ini. Itu tahun-tahun ini. Nah, sayang ini nggak tahu itu gunanya apa.
That means it's like the thumb, 4 fingers here, then thumb the part, right? And then he don't know what should he do with that track.
Yeah.
He doesn't pick to me and send to me because he doesn't have some.
That's classic orang pendek. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So guys, Richard first, what are we to make of this interview?
Well, this guy, Eggy, saw the orang pendek about a year ago in the same area of Kerinci that Delhi had his sighting in. And he was telling us that it was raining at the time. He saw the creature from a distance of about 20 to 23 feet. It was running away from him, so he didn't see the face. It was upright, man-like, covered with reddish-brown hair. He was afraid of it. He thought it was a spirit because he'd been told these things are spirits. But it left tracks, and he cast the tracks and sent them to Delhi. And the tracks were the classic orang pendek track, with the 4 toes at the front and the offset big toe.
Carl, you asked him about the animal's feet.
Yeah, I just wanted to get some verification that the orang pendek and the orang kardil are 2 different creatures. All the evidence points to them being 2 different creatures. The footprints are different, their behaviours are said to be different, but you'll find that the name orang pendek and orang kardil both essentially mean the same thing. They both mean the small person. So even though it's 2 different creatures, clearly the names are interchangeable.
And do people then there are people who will say orang kardil is orang pendek and the other way around.
And Big Owl, in Australia they call it Big Owl.
Big Owl, yeah.
Siddhartha in other areas.
Chindaku.
Siddhartha is the one that Heuvelmans wrote about, isn't it?
Yeah. He was. He seemed like a very credible witness. He worked on the roads. He wasn't. He wasn't a naturalist, but he didn't seem to have any reason to make things up. And he saw it in the same area that, virtually the same area that Delhi saw it. And his description was very similar, of something running away from him on 2 legs, covered in hair.
Yeah, like Richard said, he thinks of it as a spirit simply because that's what he's been told it is.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who is an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when there's a new show to watch. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
And here we are at the end of another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody but for whom this episode would not have happened. First of all, I want to say a big thank you to my producer Louis and to the ever lovely Miss Maxine for sending those video clips in. And I want to say a big thank you to Graham, who more than ever is looking after me as my body falls apart. And although I try to get on with my everyday life, I wouldn't be able to do it without him, so thank you, mate. And I want to say a big thank you to this week's guests, who are Richard Freeman and Carl Marshall and Dali Sandrupatra and Geordie Jackson from the Sumatra expedition, and the ever wonderful Ronan Coghlan, who will be back again next episode. Hey, what are we talking about next episode? Well, I'll be back on Wednesday, and there'll be another visit to the ASAP conference with Richard Freeman, and I'll be back next Saturday at 3 o'clock. The Wednesday ones are 6:30 in the evening. By the way, the 3 o'clock in the afternoon episode next Saturday will have the ever wonderful Ronan talking about horse eels, and there'll be more stuff as well. What are we going to talk about? I don't know, because I haven't filmed it yet, so you're going to just have to wait. So, until then, hopefully you'll be there to watch, and if you are, I'll be seeing you.